All right, so we are ready to start. Hey, welcome. Perfect timing. We're just starting. I'm Chris, and I'm Elizabeth. Welcome. So 2 first-timers tonight. That's great. Everyone has put on. We have a custom here that if someone here has never been here before, we pass around name plates, so it'll come your way. Yeah.
Why does food come to me?
It went around.
Why is everybody so quiet?
Because we're waiting for you.
Oh, I wasn't here, that's right.
All right, so we're starting with a video tonight.
Oh my God, we got one. 3.
They tell you to raise your right hand, place your left hand on the Bible. Does this stuff really matter? Which hand? Does God really give a fuck about details like this? Suppose you put your right hand on the Bible, you raise your left hand. Would that count? Or would God say, sorry, wrong hand, try again? And why does one hand have to be raised? What is the magic in this gesture? This seems like some sort of a primitive voodoo mojo shtick. Why not put your left hand on the Bible, let your right hand hang down by your side? It's more natural. Or put it in your pocket. Remember what your mother used to say? Don't put your hands in your pockets. Does she know something we don't know? Is this hand shit really important? Well, let's get back to the Bible, America's favorite national theatrical prop. Suppose the Bible they hand you to swear on is upside down, or backward, or both, and you swear to tell the truth on an upside down, backward Bible. Would that count? Suppose the Bible they hand you is an old Bible and half the pages are missing. Suppose all they have is a Chinese Bible in an American court, or a Braille Bible and you're not blind. Suppose they hand you an upside-down, backward Chinese Braille Bible with half the pages missing. At what point does all of this stuff just break down and become just a lot of stupid shit that somebody made up? They fucking made it up, folks. It's make-believe. It's make-believe. Now, all right. Okay. Let's leave the Bible aside. We'll get back to the science fiction reading later. The more important question is, what is the big deal about swearing to God in the first place? Why does swearing to God mean you're going to tell the truth? Wouldn't affect me. If they said to me, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God, I'd say, yeah. I'll tell you about as much truth as the people who wrote that fucking Bible. How do you like that? Huh? Swearing on the Bible doesn't mean anything. It's kid. Swearing to God is kid stuff. Did you remember when you were a kid? If you told another kid something he didn't quite believe, he'd say, "You swear to God?" I would always say, "Yeah, I swear to God," even if I was lying. Why not? What's going to happen if I lie? Nothing. Nothing happens if you lie, unless you get caught, and that's a whole different story. Sometimes a kid would think he was being slick with me, and he'd say, "You swear on your mother's grave?" I'd say, "Yeah. Why not? First of all, my mother was alive. She didn't even have a grave. Second of all, even if she was dead, what's she gonna do? Rise from the grave and come and haunt me? Come and haunt me? All because I told a lie to an 8-year-old? Get fucking real, will you?" Sometimes I would say, "I swear on my mother's tits." Kids are impressed with things like that. I mean, I don't care about my mother's tits either. I don't care if they fell off. Fuck her. Not my problem. They're your tits, Ma. You keep an eye on them. Swearing to God doesn't mean anything. Swearing on the Bible doesn't mean anything. You know why? Because Bible or no Bible, God or no God, if it suits their purposes, people are going to lie in court. The police do it all the time. All the time. Yes, they do. It's part of their job to protect, to serve, and to commit perjury whenever it supports the state's case. Swearing on the Bible is just one more way of controlling people and keeping them in line, and it's one more thing that holds us back as a species. Here's one more item for you, the last in our civics book, rights. Boy, everyone in this country is always running around yammering about their fucking rights. I have a right, you have no right, we have a right, they don't have a right. Folks, I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman. The Three Little Pigs, Pinocchio, Mother Goose, shit like that. Rights are an idea. They're just imaginary. They're a cute idea. Cute. But that's all. Cute and fictional. But if you think you do have rights, let me ask you this. Where do they come from? People say, well, they come from God. They're God-given rights. Oh, fuck, here we go again. Here we go again. The God excuse. The last refuge of a man with no answers and no argument. It came from God. Anything we can't describe must have come from God. Personally, folks, I believe that if your rights came from God, He would have given you the right to some food every day, and He would have given you the right to a roof over your head. God would have been looking out for you. God would have been looking out for you. You know that? He wouldn't have been worried about making sure you have a gun so you get drunk on Sunday night and kill your girlfriend's parents. But let's say it's true. Let's say God gave us these rights. Why would He give us a certain number of rights? The Bill of Rights in this country has 10 stipulations, okay? 10 rights. And apparently God was doing sloppy work that week because we've had to amend the Bill of Rights an additional 17 times. So God forgot a couple of things like slavery. Just fucking slipped His mind. But let's say God gave us the original 10. He gave the British 13. The British Bill of Rights has 13 stipulations. The Germans have 29. The Belgians have 25. The Swedish have only 6. And some people in the world have no rights at all. What kind of a fucking goddamn God-given deal is that? No rights at all? Why would God give different people in different countries different numbers of different rights? Boredom? Amusement? Bad arithmetic? Do we find out at long last, after all this time, that God is weak in math skills? Doesn't sound like divine planning to me. Sounds more like human planning. Sounds more like one group trying to control another group. In other words, business as usual in America. Now, if you think you do have rights, one last assignment for you. Next time you're at the computer, get on the internet, go to Wikipedia. When you get to Wikipedia, in the search field for Wikipedia, I want you to type in Japanese Americans 1942, and you'll find out all about your precious fucking rights, okay? All right. You know about it. You know about it. Yeah. In 1942, there were 110,000 Japanese American citizens and good standing, law-abiding people who were thrown into internment camps simply because their parents were born in the wrong country. That's all they did wrong. They had no right to a lawyer, no right to a fair trial, no right to a jury of their peers, no right to due process of any kind. The only right they had, right this way, into the internment camps. Just when these American citizens needed their rights the most, their government took them away. And rights aren't rights if someone can take them away. They're privileges. That's all we've ever had in this country is a bill of temporary privileges. And if you read the news even badly, you know that every year the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. You see how sooner or later? Yeah. Sooner or later, the people in this country are going to realize the government does not give a fuck about them. Government doesn't care about you or your children or your rights or your welfare or your safety. It simply doesn't give a fuck about you. It's interested in its own power. That's the only thing, keeping it and expanding it wherever possible. Personally, when it comes to rights, I think one of two things is true. I think either we have unlimited rights or we have no rights at all. Personally, I lean toward unlimited rights. I feel, for instance, I have the right to do anything I please. But if I do something you don't like, I think you have the right to kill me. So where are you going to find a fairer fucking deal than that? So the next time some asshole says to you, I have a right to my opinion, you say, oh yeah? Well, I have a right to my opinion, and my opinion is you have no right to your opinion. Then shoot the fuck and walk away. Thank you.
So the reason I left in the longer clip here with not just the rights piece, but the part where he's talking about God is because we definitely have to address that issue of the potentiality of God-given rights or not God. Thank you.
Delivery from Mongol.
Appreciate it. So there's a lot of people that believe, of course, that is the source of these rights, of course, right? But I think a careful study, not beyond the comedy, reveals that these are fabrications of human philosophy and implementation, not necessarily anything from the divine, right? I think most people would agree with that, but we might have someone in here that disagrees, and we'll get to that in a moment. So that piece is great, right? I think most people think George Carlin is pretty brilliant way he can put things together in a fun way, in a comedic way. I'm sorry for the use of so many cuss. I didn't realize when I was listening to it privately, I didn't notice it as much as
you have the right to cuss.
Yeah. So I think he does use. I think he uses swear words and kind of strong language pretty skillfully as well. So it is part of the performance. Yeah, but I didn't have a bleep button, so sorry. Anyway, so jumping right into this, human rights is kind of an evolving thing. We got that from. I'm probably going to repeat most of what he says, just hopefully in a little more depth for a philosophy discussion. But human rights is something that's clearly in the human domain, right? This is something, as he pointed out, all countries have different rights, different privileges, different, and he goes on in the privileges piece, you don't have rights, they're only privileges, because what he's saying is pretty skillful as well, where he says, hey, if they're actual rights, then they can't be taken away, right? Someone can just swiftly take them away. Sure, Ben.
So I think it is an error to look for rights in a document. You should look by observation of the world. If you have the right to do X, and somebody starts doing X and then a bunch of people stop them, then effectively they don't have the right to do X. But it's still written that they do.
Fair enough. Yeah, Bill, sure.
Are you also going to mention or cover the fact that some people talk about animal rights?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. This was human rights, but I think that there's definitely a tie-in for sure to animal rights, so we could raise that. So long as it doesn't become the focus, we could have a whole we can have a whole discussion on actual animal rights for sure. That's probably something. Why don't we do that next week?
Maybe chimpanzee rights.
Yeah, why don't we actually segue this conversation next week with animal rights? Because I didn't post the topic yet. Let's make next week animal rights specifically. Yeah.
I just thought it might help to clarify what the nature of rights is.
Sure.
In other words, if we're applying it to animals other than humans, then what does that mean about what we mean by rights?
Sure. Okay. Let's put that into the topic bag. So, Cosmo?
Well, I'm a little bit confused about the distinction between rights and privileges. And I think I can make a distinction that makes some sense, is that rights are something that are kind of like unconditional, whereas privileges have to be earned.
Great, good point.
If we did that, then we can make a clear distinction between the two.
Let's use that. I think that's a great starting point for that. Let's differentiate distinction between rights and privileges. I think that's a great.
You had a privilege to serve your country. So what context is that? The meaning of a privilege there. Privileged.
It's kind of pejorative.
We're all privileged to have you serve our country. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But they say it's a privilege. People say it's a privilege.
I don't think that would be a privilege.
Hey, we pay his salary.
We use it all the time. We use the term all the time.
Well, so we use the same word to mean different things at different times.
Amazing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think we're off to a good start about that rights and privileges. George Carlin uses obviously he's saying there is no rights. He's making that bold claim, and he says they're just privileges because they can be taken away in a moment's notice. And so, I don't know if y'all are very familiar with this or not, but there's actual rights transfers based on different statuses of the state of the government. For example, if we drop into a state of national emergency, based on the nature of the emergency, all this stuff goes out the window.
Aren't we always in a state of emergency?
I gotta say, I'm in Ben's boat tonight. I really am in his boat and what he posted online, because we only have rights so far as no one has come along and taken them. Our government at any time, a police officer stopping us, for little or no reason, depending on our skin color or, the look of whether or not we look for it. I don't think we have, I'm in Ben's boat tonight, and I know you probably find that unusual, but I don't think we really do have them. We have the illusion, as someone said, maybe you said online, it's an illusion of rights because it's stated someplace, but they can be taken away at a moment's notice by anybody with more power than us at that moment.
It's like the squirrel in your yard has a right to be in the tree until you come and walk by, and then you got to run away.
Well, now I'm kind of on the side.
Well, let's save that. Let's save that till next week. We talk about animal rights.
Don't lose me, Ben.
Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
Human rights, that concept is relatively new. What has preceded it has been the rights of citizenship. And so, in other words, if you are one of us, then you have certain rights. And so what we've done has expanded the us to be our species.
Except people in jail, they don't have rights.
Well, I think also, if we're talking about whether the rights manifest themselves in what we humans do, no, they don't. I mean, they do to a certain extent, but like we were talking, like Carlin was talking about, like we're talking about, those rights can be taken away. If they can be taken away and are taken away, they have been taken away over and over. So if they can be taken away, then then it's just whether they're allowed or not. But it is, I think, an effort. This is an effort to try to become a better species, to become better people by having a set of ethical principles that seem to make sense according to some criterion.
Cosmo?
Well, I think that the rights are something that we as a society have developed. And even though, give the example of the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during the war, they did maintain their rights of life and security of person, although they lost the rights of liberty. So it's not like all of their rights were gone, just some of them. And so it's kind of like, I think as a society, we're trying to build society so that people can flourish. And so to do that, we create rights. It is man-made, but it's something that we agree to live by. And we agree to live by those because it makes us all better people. Okay, so it's kind of like, if you're looking for human rights as something that is deep in my DNA, not going to happen. But it is a social agreement, and as a social agreement, it's kind of like we're trying to reach for our highest plane, our best selves, our inner angels, and we often don't get there, but try. It's worth the effort.
So that's might be a case to make for stating, putting down on paper, if you will, and enacting into law certain rights, because that's a way of at least putting it down into some type of construct, social construct, in a formal way, right? So we can look at declared rights as that formalization of rights from the social contract that was derived from philosophy, from government, from all these different sources, right? Ben, did you have something?
Yeah, how about the right to not inherit debts from your ancestors, such as the national debt? I didn't borrow that, why should I owe it?
That's interesting. So maybe we can get into that, talking about what rights we might want to add or subtract. We're about to look at what Cosmo offered on the website, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the UN. We're about to go through that. Rather than focusing in specifically on the United States or going into Saudi Arabia and talking about women's rights and all this, kind of start from the top and work our way down. So to kind of look at this Declaration of Human Rights that was proposed to be a global standard, it's up to the individual countries to adopt it. In the state of North Carolina, we have different rights and privileges than you do if you live in Kentucky. Each state has its own different variations of particular rights they can add or subtract. No, they can't subtract. They can add additional rights. They can't subtract from federally mandated rights, right? So like a state can't say, hey, we no longer allow the freedom of speech, right? Because at the federal level, that's already laid down. They can add a right in, right? They can add in rights, but they can't take them away at the state level.
Yeah, you mentioned the law. And my way of looking at that is the law is the practical application of ethical principles. Mm-hmm. So you have the ethical principles, and then we try to work out the procedures that are consistent with those ethical principles, the procedures as to how we will react to situations.
I don't think we can turn them ethical principles for all time. I mean, there was segregation, and there were laws keeping the races apart. Right. That was law, and ethics had nothing to do with that.
Well, yeah, the law was in place because people believed that that's what should be done. What should be done, that would be a statement of the principle. And how it's carried out, that's the letter of the law. That's the procedures.
So that was an ethical proceeding? I'm sure we didn't have all the people voting on that at that time.
By ethics, all I mean is what we should and should not do.
Let's let a new person in. Go ahead.
Should we call those values that you're referring to now?
That's another word for ethics. And I don't know why values. Now values has other meanings also. Like I can value hamburgers or something, and that means. But very often when people are talking about values, if you look closely at what they're saying, they're talking about ethical principles, beliefs, ethical beliefs about what we should and should not do.
Yeah, so Cosmo, can I just hold for 1 second? I want to get the preamble here of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and then step into the actual individual proclaimed rights in this document, and then kind of formulate our group discussion around those, because they're all very, very interesting to my mind and mean a lot. They're profound. So this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a milestone document in the history of human rights, that's a nice, that ties nicely into the idea that this is an evolving process. This is something that we're working on collectively as human race, right, to try to improve over time, I would think is the direction of this arrow. We would assume it to be, or would hope that it is. Drafted by representatives within different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. It's a good idea. Let's bring the cultures of the world together, kind of make sense what is universally kind of applicable to all those cultures. That does make sense, right? Declaration proclaimed by the United States General Assembly in Paris on 10 December 1948. Right? There's the resolution identifier as a common standard of achievements for all peoples and of all nations. Sets out for the first time fundamental human rights to be universally protected, which is another piece. How are the rights actually enforced and protected and made sure that they are not violated, right? and has been translated into over 500 languages. That's kind of cool too. All right. I wish there was a bunch of philosophy that was translated into 500 languages. Right? So this preamble is I guess probably worth going into. Hey Megan, can you read that for me? It's a little small from up here. Start at the top. Whereas?
Y'all gotta be patient with me because I'm not that good of a reader. Okay. Whereas recognition of the inherent, is that inherent? Okay, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Dignity and of the equal and
Inalienable?
Yeah, there you go. Rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt, I hope I said that right,
you did.
For human rights have resulted in
barbarous, you're fine.
Okay. Acts which have outraged the. I don't know these words, man.
It's fine.
Wow.
Yeah, you're doing just fine.
English is a dumb language.
You're doing okay. Don't worry about it.
Of mankind and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom in speech and belief and freedom from fear and want. This is weird. Has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people, whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression. Tyranny, whatever.
Don't slow her down.
That human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations, whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter
reaffirmed
their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined, to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United States, the promotion of universal respect for and observance. Is that
right?
Okay. Of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Whereas
Sorry. There you go.
Oh no.
Stop. Whereas
a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is one of the greatest importance for the full realization of this pledge.
Good.
Now, therefore, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the people of member states themselves and among the people of territories under the jurisdiction.
Excellent. Well read. Okay, so I would summarize this as really simply, to take all these words and kind of put it down into a sentence. I'd say, here a group of people from different cultures have come together to try to determine what universally makes sense to and should apply to all people on this planet for a more peaceful and equitable world. Right? If y'all wanted a one-line summary, probably nobody wanted it, but there you go. Anyway, so Article 1, and here's where we'll kind of get into our group discussion. These are all, I think, very, very beautifully worded, and they're almost poetic, which might be a gripe for some people, but anyway, let's get into it. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Okay?
Free of what?
Are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Right? They're endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. That's a lot there. That is a lot of things to say in one.
I don't think it's correct.
That's unfortunate, but okay. So there's two parts. It's first a reference to all human beings, which is an important designation. That means everybody.
It's an aspiration bill.
This means everybody. Everyone just by birthright is born free and equal in dignity and rights. Okay? So in dignity and rights, equal in dignity and rights. Let's see.
Something to aspire to.
That's right. So if we look at if we value this statement, okay, if we look at this as some type of aspiration that we could even attune our own intellect and our own consciousness towards, we have to look at the world in a way in which every person, every human being that's born into this world is born of dignity and rights equal to my own and everyone else's, right?
It
sounds good. Yeah,
sounds great.
Sounds great.
But
That sounds wonderful. However,
yeah, they've just been repeating that kind of old saying that you're better off being a rich guilty person than a poor innocent person in our system of justice.
And does it apply to 1-year-olds?
As far as system of justice.
Well, 1-year-olds are not really entirely free because they're so dependent on their parents or whoever.
Well, we haven't got the freedom. Oh, yes,
Sure.
we do.
Cosmo, go ahead.
I wanted to point out that since this applies to all human beings without condition, that means that these are rights, but make the distinction between that and privileges. Privileges have to be earned. This doesn't have to be earned.
Exactly.
Not earned or bestowed.
Now, these are questions. Is this what's happening?
Absolutely.
That is not a command.
It is absolutely what is happening. It's just an evolutionary process. It's moving towards this direction. It's not universally applied by any stretch of the imagination right now. And that's why the title of this was Human Rights in 2019.
I do.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I believe it.
Yes.
I treat people that way.
Yes. I was just about to get into that exact thing.
Some people better than others.
I was just about to get into that. It's an orientation, and a lot of people do already have this orientation. Absolutely. Please.
But to say beings, are born free, then wouldn't that be the same thing as saying that we are sovereign? Because we don't have sovereign. We are not sovereign beings.
Nation states are sovereign.
That's a great question. I'm not sure if I have an immediate answer. I have to think that one through a little bit. That's actually a deep question, because that free, we'd have to then get really detailed on it.
Back to what Ben was saying. Free from what? You said that earlier, right? You were like, born free from what? Like,
they're not free to national debt.
Yeah, because when you're sovereign, you're free from any rules. You're free from any of these rights and privileges and all of these man-made.
So yeah, so use the national debt idea then. Fine. That then would be something that would be not a freedom you're born with. In this case, that would be a violation of this idea, or an idea that hasn't progressed yet to that point, right? Actually, when you're born you're not born a citizen of the planet. You're born a citizen of some country. In most places in this world, right? That's another then label, and then by default inhibitor. So if at birth, if we try to reach this kind of pie in the sky idea, this vision, we'd have to say that every person in the world would then have to be not part of all that. We'd have to move towards a direction where that is not the case. Every person is born truly free and their own, they have their own sovereignty. I think that is the best thing I can come up with right now.
I don't know, that whole idea of freedom and sovereignty. When I think of freedom alone, I think of half the story. If you talk about freedom without responsibility, you're deluding yourself. That the freedom and responsibility have to go together. If you're separating them, then you're not understanding what's going on.
So to make these a set of articles and not a series of hundreds of thousands of word essays, right?
Right.
You kind of have to have a summary in this form, I think, to kind of, and then leave the detail later, which weakens them, but at the same time it strengthens them because there's something you can put your head around on face value, right? So we're going to be torn all night between those two paradoxes. Yeah. Because I can come up with 100 reasons right off the top of my head, examples of how this would or would not apply, and how it does or does not apply. Right? Yeah. So let's get Elizabeth and then Bill.
When you say does not apply, what do you mean by that? Apply to what?
Well, so with the examples we just kind of said, to say everyone on this planet right now is being born free, that just somewhat doesn't apply in many cases. Like if you're born in North Korea,
Well, I think the way that I interpret it, while I understand and appreciate that these are aspirational statements, I think they're also tactical in the sense that the objective you mentioned earlier is very important. In order to, the objective is to achieve this, what was it, peace, world, I don't remember, there was an objective that was very clearly defined just before this. In order to have, there, is the, but in order to have, so this is, these are the requirements.
Right.
So, to achieve that objective.
These articles of how we'd achieve this,
in order to achieve
overarching
that
purpose.
That's where.
Now, how about we put anybody in jail that takes away your rights instead of trying to give people rights?
We'll get into the jail idea for sure. Bill and then Megan.
Okay, well, can we clarify what is meant by dignity?
No.
I don't have any of that.
Well,
beyond going to the
might be
definition,
respect.
we can just kind of go to the dictionary definition.
There's your definition.
State or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. A composed
But
or
that's something that's internal. That's not, like, dignity comes from within. I don't look towards someone else to honor and respect. That's something that I feel like that's something you have to work on internally.
It does,
Yeah.
but if I treat you without dignity, with disrespect, that could affect your own self-image.
Can we say a default state?
If you let it in and you let
Sure. Can we look at it as just for a placeholder for now? Can we look at it as a just let's use this as a placeholder. Let's say that this part about everyone by default, if you will, has that internal worthiness of honor and respect. And let that be our stand-in definition as we move through. Megan?
So that's
sorry.
true no matter what they do.
Right.
Well, I would say yes, but with a star, with an asterisk, right? Like I'd say the default state without attaching anything else to it, just by default, this is the state.
Yes, let us honor Hitler.
Well, by default, but then when he creates a world war, then maybe we back off the dignity. Like maybe then the dignity towards that person changes. Yeah.
So it's a privilege.
So,
but if that's a right, so.
See, that's where it's careful. It's being born free and equal in dignity and rights, not saying that's maintained throughout your life.
Okay, so it applies only to the newborn.
Let's call it the default state.
Okay, so make a law that all 1-year-olds become slaves. They were born free.
Yikes.
And I think it's something.
Let's not do that.
Yeah, you
So-
wait till they're like 5, then they're a slave. They go to
There's
school.
the very last phrase there, that we should act toward one another in the spirit of brotherhood, the family, and to actually do that, to look at folks, even strangers, as part of the family. That's what it takes.
When I've had exercises in that regard, it's actually triggered my empathy to the point of pain, personal pain. So I agree with you, but that comes with warnings. To truly take on that mindset, it can really invoke your empathy towards people around the world in a way that can be very painful internally. Right? Please.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Megan was supposed to speak. Sorry, Megan, go ahead. No? Okay. All right. If it comes back to you, let us know.
So I get what they're trying to say, and they're in a spirit of brotherhood, but as the human species, that's not how, like, our animal instinct. Animals don't treat all animals like this is my family. Like,
But that's what makes us different.
But we're still animals. We just have choice.
See, now we're educated to believe that, but I can convince you otherwise. I think if given some time.
But we're social animals, which means we need each other. So just practical to consider.
I just think that's our animal.
Right. It's what we. It's what we do, like other animals. That's why we're trying to correct what we do. We are very tribalistic, and so it's our group, and we can easily attack, kill, and even eat neighboring tribe, and so forth.
Can I interrupt you on that? that tribalistic piece. This is showing us a way to break that tribalism. Think of us all as one big tribe.
Right.
And then we're not, the reason why we're not animals, we're animals by taxonomy, which means like by scientific classification. By scientific classification, we're animals. By differentiation of species, we're so vastly different from any other species on this planet, there's no comparison.
In certain ways.
I think in almost all ways. Yeah.
Well, I mean, any species could point that. How different we are.
That's an interesting point. I'll speak. Please,
one
Cosmo.
of the things that really inspired me was from Albert Einstein, who was on his deathbed, and Bertrand Russell went to see, and they had a joint letter that they wrote. It's called the Bertrand Russell Albert Einstein Manifesto. And toward the very end of that letter, it said, "Remember your humanity and forget the rest. If you can do so, the way lies open to a new paradise. If you cannot, there lies before you the risk of universal death."
So if we continue on this pathway of just thinking of ourselves as a member of an animal kingdom, and we don't have some type of control over our own destiny, we're like subject to the fate of animal instincts and primal behaviors and all this kind of stuff, then that probably speaks much to the latter of that comment than the hopefulness of this type of document. Please, Susan.
I think it's more that if we don't get back in touch with our natural empathy for whomever, whether it's our fellow humans or other species, we have to have respect for all life. Otherwise, we're going to keep destroying this beautiful planet.
Agreed. And so this is when we have these kind of pathways, natural pathways that exist within our social constructs for things like to invoke tribalism. We have to understand that if we engage in that, if we delve into that dynamic with that group, we now will suffer that reduction in empathy and make a conscious decision. Is that what we really want to do? Do we want to have a reduction in empathy by going along with this tribal behavior? For example, I'm a Panthers fan, and the quarterback for the Bills or whatever gets killed on the field, right? And I'm like, yeah! There's something systematically become wrong with me, right? That tribalism has indeed taken over, and I've now reoriented my thinking and overridden my own natural empathy. That's a terrible mental state to be in my opinion. So I wholesale agree with you. Can we have Megan? Because now she hands back up. Go ahead.
Who would be cheering if like somebody got?
Oh, trust me. Trust me. Yeah, we don't. Our family doesn't participate in this, but you know.
Well, I hate football. I'm sorry if anybody in here likes it. Just me
Two young
personally.
boys recently last year watched a man drown and were goading him on. Go on down once again. Did not save him, videotaped it. So there you go. Two young teenage boys doing it.
That's the technology by proxy.
And they could not be prosecuted for not saving them because you're not required by law to save a man who's drowning. Jump in and save him. But they touted him the whole time he was drowning and begging for his life.
So that technology that's interesting because technology and cultural shifts can actually become that proxy that separates us from our empathy. So like someone drowning and someone pulling out their video camera rather than doing something can be a technology acting as a proxy to divert us from the reality of the situation. And that's something with technology use we have to keep in mind as well.
And I think it is important. I know you and I seem to have divergence of opinion here, but I think it is important to recognize that we are indeed animals, and that animals have a certain empathy for some others, namely tribalism, like there's attachment and the wish to protect and so forth. It's we humans, because of our development of language and therefore our highly increased ability to be empathetic with people because they can tell us what it's like to be me, therefore we're the only animal on this planet that can think in terms of, well, let's have empathy for everyone. It's important. That's an accomplishment that we are mastering this aspect of our basic hominid animal nature, that we're a social hierarchy animal, and it causes a lot of misery. And so we're able to overcome it. And that's what ethics is primarily about, overcoming these natural tendencies in ourselves to become better, meaning having a better life for everyone.
Okay.
Call me ready.
Just letting that sit in. So now that everyone's had a chance to think about that, contrast it to this worldview, right? Whereas if essential, a man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebel against tyranny and oppression. The human rights should be protected by the rule of law, onward, right? So this is saying that, like, as a last resort, we must rebel if these type of things aren't being adhered to. If we're being told something other than this, we have to push towards this. This isn't an easy thing. It's easy to go with the status quo. It's easy to go with the classic thinking that man is some kind of animal, right? And this is easy. It's hard to envision man as something else. And, you know, who in the world, where did it come from? Who in the philosophy that I've been exposed to in my whole entire life, why has the viewpoint of man been so derogatory? It can't be any longer. If we're going to move forward in the face of all these new challenges of high technology, of weapons that are beyond mass destruction, weapons of global destruction, and the potential futurality of everything that's to come, if we don't get ourselves in the right way, if we keep thinking that, oh yeah, if we don't have this kind of idea of brotherhood of man and everyone's born equal in dignity and free and rights, if we don't start thinking this way, we're going to continue to think in that past paradigm and be accepting of tribalism. Being accepting of the person taking the video while someone's drowning, you know, that's unacceptable. We should rebel against such things.
So my question is then, how do you change the collective? Because it's the collective consciousness that is damaged right now, to not think that we're all one and that we're not equal and all of these things. And so how do you per se change the collective conscious?
Great, two ways. One, it will happen naturally. The old ideas die off naturally, new ideas come forward. Cycle of life. So you have a natural regression of past ideas because of the fact that we have a life cycle. Second of all, so that's always there. The constant renewal of philosophy and ideas will constantly be there. Culture then shapes each subsequent generation, right? And then, so secondarily is things like this, talking deeply about our own personal individual state of mind and our disposition towards the world, and recognizing how much that actually matters, and making sure that we advocate for ourselves, and then as we move out to our family, to our communities, and to the world at large, we make sure that we advocate for those at every step of the way, despite how hard that is. So we take the more difficult position, which is painful, you know, but absolutely necessary, because there's more than just us in it as stakeholders, right? We're all in this together as stakeholders in our future generations to come. Susan, then Bill, and then Cosmo. We'll go around.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, but I do think it's important in order to preserve humanity. I think it's important to expand that empathy to include all living beings. I mean, even ones.
I think that's a natural philosophical progression, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
And I think that might be why the Native Americans did better in their societies, got along better before we showed up, because they had more respect. You know, they still used animals for food, but sparingly. They didn't do a lot of it. And they always thanked the animal and were very respectful about killing the animal, which I'm not happy with. But yeah, I just think that's important too.
Agree. Bill and Cosmo?
Yeah, I agree with part two of what you said, meaning that it's going to take a lot of hard work. Part one was like you seem to be saying, and maybe you weren't, that, well, it's just going to naturally happen. And I don't think so. I think that for the past million years, or however far back you want to go, we have been tribalistic. We've fought with each other. We've done horrible things to each other according to our current standards. And but because we have developed language and we've learned to communicate with each other about what it's like to be me and what it's like to be you and so forth, we are finding, we're getting this idea that we can live drastically better than we have ever lived so far. And this is progress in that direction. But saying, well, it just naturally is going to occur, depends on how you look at it. Yeah, hopefully it will, but it will be by virtue of part 2 of what you said, and that is that we have to recognize the importance of it and fight to get there.
So Cosmo, I want to just address that real briefly before I'll get to your comment just one second. So, okay, evolutionary theory is quite clear on how, if you believe in the process of evolution, evolutionary social theory is quite clear on how empathy and all these things, compassion for one another, all the really positive traits that we admire in human beings is so crucial to our success. That was what makes human beings unlike any other quote-unquote species on this planet. Human beings are unique in the sense that we, through evolutionary process, through evolutionary theory, shows clearly how these particular characteristics that are built into us, right, through the process of evolution, have allowed us to then create civilization as we know it today. It was a predecessor. So yes, naturally it is already inside us. It's these superlative things, it's these externalities that cloud the human mind. Human beings in their native state work together. We have a spirit of working together. That's by far a compulsion. Put someone in solitary confinement and see what happens to them. Most of the time they go insane, right? We have this connected need in this individual, in this case, into a brotherhood kind of disposition. What this is saying is take that to the next level. Let's look at the brotherhood of man across the board, right? Raise the bar, work towards that kind of ideology. And so yes, we have a foundational, just based on a natural progression through a process of evolution, we have a natural progression to a state that enabled civilization, right? And that enabled technology with our very advanced cerebral cortex, right? That triggered advancements in technology, which then counterplayed into that again, we were able to advance cognitively further and further and further to the state that we are in today. And so now that we're at that plateau, it's time to look forward to the next level, right? And the next level is this brotherhood of man idea, right? That when someone is struggling from Ebola in Nigeria, that hurts me too. That's unacceptable. When a person is whipping an animal somewhere, right? Being cruel to an animal, that should be unacceptable by all standards, right? Because that's not the disposition of us humans. We don't do this. Yeah, we have this natural empathy that gets triggered, and we can sense that through anthropomorphication, which is also a natural trait that we have. We identify human characteristics in all animals. We do this, so it's built into us. We can't help ourselves. It happens automatically. And so that triggers the empathy when we see an animal being tortured or abused severely. And so that's a unhealthiness for a human being to have that exposure to that. So we can tie it together that way, quite easily. Cosmo?
I think you were mentioning, well, we have this ideal of universal brotherhood and sisterhood, the family of human beings. That's something that it seems very intuitive to strive for. Yet, why aren't we there? So one of the reasons why we're not there is we don't have enough commandments. Now, the Buddhists have one commandment that might solve the problem, and that is, thou shalt not speak divisively. Divisive speech is a sin.
So no us versus them.
Hold it.
I'm sorry.
Divisive speech is a sin. And so any time that you get, and a pretty good example of that is Trump and his divisive speech, pitting one group against the other. And so the strategy of divisive speech is that our side, we want to make a split between our side and their side. Our side's good, their side is evil, bad. And so once you make that split, you've split the family. You're now you've got this good and evil thing going on there. It separates people apart. Another thing besides divisive speech is our predilection for competition. I mean, it's like if there's a situation that just naturally appears to be cooperative, that we would benefit from cooperation, we'll turn it into competition. Well, shit. How many? I know from reading Swami Rama, he was saying, in families, no competition. So that's one of the things competition is going to push people apart.
Please.
So what I was going to say, I'm sorry I interrupted you. When you're talking about this type of speech, this division and that kind of thing, most people think in a dualistic form. Good, bad, right, wrong, left, right. That there's that's how this dimension thinks in. They think dualistically. The trick is to not think dualistically and to get to a place where everything is equal. And I find that extremely hard.
Not equal.
Well, not equal, but the same. Everything is the same. Yes, equal. It's the same because what the Buddhists are talking about, whenever they're talking about that the division thing, they're talking about a tantric path of Buddhism, which most people don't even understand if you haven't read the scriptures and that kind of the Vedas and everything that goes along with that. That's something that we as a species need to get to, less duality and more, more of like an equality kind of thing, and not seeing things as right, wrong, up, down, left, right, that kind of thing, and just being the observer and
nice.
Observing it.
That actually segues nicely into Article 2, if you don't mind.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Right after, we'll do this one, and then we started taking a break halfway through a few meetups ago. Seems to be well received, so we'll do this one, and we'll take a just brief break so people can get a drink or use the bathroom, whatever. Anyway, Article 2, everyone, blanket, right? No exceptions. It's entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, or other opinion. That's an interesting one. National or social origin, property, birth, or other status. So, or other status, meaning that then means they specifically call out these kind of problem child areas, right? But then they go on to say, or other status. There is no status by which you're then divorced from it, right? Is my way I read that. And furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, reference that again, jurisdictional, international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or any other, so all. Limitation of sovereignty. Okay. Wow, that's a lot. And we'll take a break and unpack that, but I just wanted to point out the thing that popped off the page on me in this is political. How easily we align ourselves with our political beliefs, right? Sometimes that we can very quickly be ready to kind of dilute the rights of that opposing, like group or thought process. So what this is saying is there's no property of man on the table which can then alienate or divorce someone from these rights, which is really a new way to think. If we want to philosophically look at this as like reflect on it for ourselves, like, wow, I can actually take this internally and start looking at people in a whole new light, not as a collection of their attributes. I look at it as their humanity first and foremost, right? Their attributes are just superlative. They're remote. They're not core. Core is their humanity. Yeah, right. On that note.
So even like homeless people with absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. Amen. All right, we'll take a 5-minute break and jump back to it.
This is way better than Facebook when you're getting phone and trying to explain it to someone,
So for the new people that come, we have coffee and what's laid on the table. Help yourself, and then the bathrooms and stuff are around the wall here. You can get to it by either way, going this way or through there.
Try to have one of these discussions on Facebook.
Cookies are pretty good.
That's pretty interesting.
I see lots of empathy there, right?
They're kind of, they're kind of
I find
Oh, thank you.
that if I'm
Isn't she
showing
great?
I'm kind of a slow reader.
And did you notice, like,
Because you know very well. I think you're blocking yourself because you think that.
I was just gonna say that same thing. Because when she got to the end and she got
Every
it,
time she thought she made a mistake, she didn't.
I know.
I read faster like when I'm not reading out
The
loud.
last paragraph, when you just got comfortable with it, you were not one flaw. It was just like totally smooth. We're working on the confidence. But thank you, appreciate the compliment.
Did you start this? Did you organize it? It's brilliant.
Thank you.
I like to get in there and
It's
Glad you're here.
It's been over a year, right?
Oh yeah, it's been 2 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've
2?
we've had some heart to hearts, like individual one-on-ones with me, like talking to people that come to my group regularly, and it's been, everyone has reported it's been a transformative experience.
And how are you so passionate and knowledgeable on the subject that is philosophy? Student
I'm not. I'm not aligned with any religion. I don't believe in the supernatural realm and stuff like that. And I care. I do care. I have a deep compassion for human beings. So it manifests like this. But I'm no perfect person by any stretch of the imagination.
I can kind of answer that for
I
you.
learned. Oh, thanks. Please.
Sorry.
I'm terrified of what you might say.
No, it's just because usually he plans out like what each discussion is going to be, and then if he maybe doesn't know something about it, he'll like educate himself on it beforehand, so he knows like a lot lot about it. So yeah,
I put the subject out a week ahead of time, so everyone has a chance to.
Yeah, so then I think that gives
study.
you enough time to. Well, I think you already kind of know what you're talking about, like to begin with, but you get.
I can fake it.
Well, I was curious if you were maybe a teacher of the subject.
He should be.
Could be, right? Yeah. But it sounds like you have the passion.
I'm trained as an educator. I did computer training. I did like this style, format. Someone standing up at a podium teaching something. I did that for 5 years. I did computer training around the world teaching software. Right? So that serves that purpose. So like I said, I can fake it better than most. But
never look at my comments and be like, oh, she was attacking that person or whatever. I'm always like, look, I'm coming at this from an understanding point of view and a loving point of view, and this is what my understanding is, and this, and then I get called Becky.
I would love to do it as a full-time job.
All of these really crazy
I don't know how to.
Becky with the good hair, yes, honey.
Expose and challenge to think about. I think unfortunately in America, a lot of us just don't think about.
Well, if something magical happens and you just think that you see, wow, if you really believe that this is super important, maybe we can form some type of alliance and you can help take it to that level.
You should write a book.
You could write articles. There should be a way to have the community of Charlotte exposed.
This is live streamed, but this is
facilitator. I get that you're a facilitator.
The only secret to the formula, if hopefully this isn't so arrogant, but the secret to the formula is that I listen to what people say and I think about what they say. And I mean that's the only thing I'm doing is I'm just listening, and I have such a lack of ego as far as I know everything and everyone else doesn't. I've figured out in my life how to divorce myself from that, and so that's the reason anything positive is shining through. Because I've learned that that's the barrier to almost everything. Is you have to drop that ego. Oh, you're gonna say that's not true. You're an egomaniac.
What I wanted to ask earlier, that's why I had my hand raised up the first time. But it kind of I didn't want to drag us back to what we were talking about before, so I kind of just let it go. What I wanted to ask was, you brought up the thing about North Korea, and actually not that long ago, I think maybe a week ago, there was this thing on YouTube I found. It was about this woman. She was from North Korea, and she was talking about how she got out along with her mother, and it's just some of the stuff that they talked about was just horrible, and I'm just and what my question was is that if she were to come to America, can't they? She's still technically a North Korean citizen, so
can't they come and be like, you?
Oh, you're talking about extradition. That's complex. Extradition is like a thing where you go to grab somebody that's a citizen of one country that's moved or fled to another country, and you try to get them back because they've committed a crime or otherwise were not authorized to do that. That's called extradition, and there's rules around. Every nation has their own array of rules on how extradition works.
See, I wish you had brought that up, because it makes me think, well, if what we're aspiring to with this Declaration of Universal Human Rights,
wouldn't matter where you were.
In that situation, does it matter?
It wouldn't matter in that situation.
Shouldn't she be protected by the international community, given that her rights, she doesn't have any rights in North Korea?
I was just curious.
And the stepping stone to that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the stepping stone to that is that now there's these, what's it called? It's not anonymity, it's amnesty. There's amnesty laws in most countries. So if someone is fleeing a political situation or something where their rights have been restricted or just deprived, and they flee to another country, there's amnesty laws, and most countries have them.
So basically,
you can come to another country and get protection. That's right.
But then that brings up the issue of refugees, which is such a controversial, because there's the issue of capacity. Look at Germany. I love Angela Merkel. If you think about it,
this one vlogger or somebody on YouTube, he got permission, or you can go on tours of North Korea, but they're very restricted. So like,
oh, I heard about this.
Yeah,
stole a sign or something.
Oh, I remember that.
Well, no, I'm talking about something different. But yeah, that person, they pulled down a poster for one of the people, and then he couldn't leave, and then he got in so much trouble. I think he died or something like that. Didn't he die?
Yes, that is the one.
Which I think is cruel and absolutely horrendous, but that's just me.
It's a mystery as to exactly what happened.
It's on film.
But he
It's on film. It's shown him ripping down the...
No, I mean like what happened that led to his death.
Oh, I don't know what happened. All I know is that he died. He was with his friend, and his friend was recording it.
His friend got lucky.
Yeah, to not be included as like an accessory.
If they caught him filming that, also.
It was being live streamed. That's how they were able to. Anyway, so but this new vlogger, he actually was like on a tour there, and he was showing like how beautiful it is there and stuff like that. And I have to admit, it looks pretty nice over there. But like everybody there just looks like robots almost. It's like nobody there looks happy. They all just look like they're dead inside. They just look like they're just like, is it just robots? And I'm like, that's horrible. No wonder these people are trying to leave. But if they leave, they could be either like killed or like, you know.
So they might have a similar assessment if they were to come to America and look at our culture. They might say people just all like the same. They all eat McDonald's. They're all just into buying stuff. They have no family. They don't know how to play musical instruments. They don't speak multiple languages. They're fat. And they can make all these indictments about us as well.
Well,
they probably do.
Well, that's what I was arguing. I think that we are as well here in the United States. I think we're brainwashed into a different, right?
Capitalism, that's the...
Culture is the brainwashing effect across everybody. And so there's no person that I know of, maybe there is somewhere, but there's almost nobody lives in a vacuum as far as not being exposed to some type of culture. So if you were born in India, you're likely to be a Hindi and have that religion. You likely are in a caste. You see what I'm saying? You speak that language. All those things are just automatic by the default that we get through the culture. And so when that one culture then it does a bunch of things differently than this other culture, compare notes, they're going to look at how they do things naturally. It's like bizarre. It's automatic, a xenophobically bizarre thing. So that's why world travel is like one of the ultimate learning experiences, especially saturation into another culture. Because then you realize, wait a minute, these cultural facets are all part of the same human equation. They're just different manifestations of the same.
True.
I think Steve is like, we're ready to get back.
I know, and I haven't let you take your break. Take your break.
I'm good. Thank you, Elizabeth.
But like, they just were like,
they seem to you like robots.
And nobody there looked happy. The hotels there were like empty. All the people there, like there was nobody like really around. And then everywhere you see like statues like Kim Jong-un and whoever else. Do you know who his name is?
Yeah, Kim Jong.
Kim Jong Un. There's another
Kim
one.
Jong Un and Kim Jong Un.
Whatever.
It's just their words.
And so like everywhere you can see like these statues, and like if you take a picture of their statue incorrectly, you can get in trouble for it.
In Iraq, before Saddam Hussein was overthrown by the United States Army, if there was like a newspaper flying through the wind and it had Saddam's face on it, and you stepped on it, you would get killed, murdered. So let's go back to this.
But that was what I just wanted to ask. When I raised my hand, I was really curious.
Yeah, like Elizabeth said, you should have raised that because there's value there in this conversation.
I was like, can we get to the definition of dignity? So I'm just like,
Who's just doing this thing? We're learning to better sidestep him more and more.
I do believe adults are in control or can control
My understanding is
their own
that when women
destiny.
are in the receptive part of their cycle, that they actually have a powerful chain of war. That's built into us. And it's not just us.
Of course we want that division, and that part of our culture, we're trying to have a child. We want someone who's strong, smart,
The way things were worded were just
used to those things. I don't know what people want.
That doesn't sound right.
And I think it actually goes back to lobsters, as I understand it.
Too great. Okay. Sorry, I was just using that as a cue to get attention without being loud.
Congratulations.
But it's a part of social organization.
Chris, if you would drop next time, if you would drop a white sheet over that screen, it'd probably fix the reflection.
Yeah, probably. It's got a.
So you're bringing the white sheet next?
It's got a gloss finish on it, and I guess it does project some of that white light.
You should just put one there permanently.
Well, wait a minute. Well, why don't you bring that
on it?
They have like they do have like projector screens that I can mount and then pull down over it, and that doesn't have it has a flat finish that wouldn't reflect. So yeah, it is annoying. Sorry about that. All right, so Article 3. Okay, so again, Article 2 is saying everyone has the right to everything below, right? So without exception.
Everyone except criminals, right?
Well, that's part of the we'll get into it. These articles do discuss that. So
the United States Constitution, I believe,
say there's an exception.
I think the United States Constitution says that criminals are allowed to be slaves.
Can you post that to the meetup discussion board?
I don't remember the exact wording.
Cosmo, you were going to say?
No, I was just hoping to go to Article 3.
Okay, yeah, we'll get past 3. Just to give you guys a summary, there's quite a few here, right? So we'll try to move a little swiftly through them, right? As you can see, this goes to 30. So it's, as Cosmo said, we need more, right? We need more commandments. Please.
We need a few simple ideas that can describe things in combinations. So we need to list every special case.
You were claiming that was in the Constitution, but that would literally be going against almost everything that we stand for here in America.
But you do see prisoners on the side of the road slaving.
No. Prisoners give up.
Oh no, they make 25 cents an hour.
Out in the
fresh air.
But that's not in
Well, actually, Article 5 deals with that.
All right, so number 3.
It's a punishment. Being a slave is a punishment.
Number 3. I need a gavel. I think I need a gavel. Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. That's the displacement of the pursuit of happiness from our cultural distinction, but this is very much mirrors that. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Cosmo.
That security of person is rather interesting because it means that harm shall not be even threatened. No harm. That society cannot harm any individual.
I'm already aware of that. So that's a little bit different from the pursuit of happiness kind of bent, for sure. I think the security of person is an improvement upon. And I think it talks about, in the preamble, it talks about this kind of existence that's free of most fear as far as reasonably possible. So the constant state of living in fear is one of the most debilitating conditions to put a human being in. A person living in perpetual fear is a severe punishment. And you'll find, unfortunately, looking around the world, a lot of people are almost perpetually in a state of fear from one thing or another. Bill?
Yeah, like security, like Cosmo was pointing out, like threat or anything that causes a person to experience a lot of distress and so forth. Well, that's going to collide with our freedom to express opinions or to speak derogatorily to other people. So it's a very complex kind of thing.
So we do get into this early on. We're saying here, to summarize this, is that we do have a kind of natural built-in conflict between some of these proclamations or articles or declarations.
Like
fair enough. Fair enough.
When you speak about rights, you also have to speak about responsibilities. They cannot be separated.
Good point. Article 4, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all forms, in all their forms. Okay, that's very distinct. That article is dedicated very explicitly to saying no slavery, period.
Still have any form.
Of any form, and all of its forms, that's right.
And isn't our financial system a system of slavery?
I think it can be extracted. I think it can be abstracted to that. Sure, I could argue a case for that. I think, and that's why I believe in universal, baseline socialism, because that would take away the sustenance demand of labor, even, right? So, like, if everyone by right had, like George Carlin said, I think everyone should have the right to have food in their mouth and shelter over, roof over their head. If we had that kind of vision of the world, that kind of fixes the problem of this indentured servitude or slavery of the financial system, debt slaves. So that's why I am in agreement with that, because I don't think that you should have to be forced into labor of any kind to pay for food.
And we have the resources.
We do have the resource, please.
Yeah, but it won't fix that, because money is what is the big issue with this made up thing that we like to, put value on and stuff. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Ubuntu movement.
Absolutely.
That to me, I feel like is more of a, progressive essence.
Ubuntu Linux?
Ubuntu is
No.
moneyless society.
Spell that?
Ubuntu.
Yeah. Ubuntu. Ubuntu.
So
it's basically where we were before money was ever invented.
Like barter?
No, it's not bartering.
So you can take this concept, if you conceptualize value, and there's so many different facets of value. Value, some people say, is what someone's willing to pay. You can look at value in all kinds of different distinctions. You can find a different way to portray value. It's circumstantial. You can supply and demand, laissez-faire. It's Kantian. There's all of these philosophies about that, right? Well, if you look at it, I think in this kind of organic sense, if you look at what you can literally tie to at the end of the day, most value to, this is my opinion, I think the empirical evidence follows this, is its energy, right, of some capacity. So things that, for example, a brick is a lot more expensive than other forms of construction material. I don't know why I just all of a sudden thought about bricks, but it takes a lot of energy to mine the clay, to fire it in a really hot oven, right, etc. So it can only be made so cheaply. There's a cost barrier, so there's a limit because it requires energy. Everything that we do on a daily basis takes some type of energy production to produce. And so we've been on this kind of petroleum economy / value system for quite some time now, since pretty much the Industrial Revolution, right? Because you can't have all this automation, mechanization without energy. So energy ends up, at the end of the day, you have to mine the resources, you have to distribute them around the world. All of this takes vast amounts of energy, which is kind of reflective in the price. You can kind of do a blanket assessment and look at just the price of various things and realize that, wow, really the more energy intense things do have a tendency to be more expensive, right? So if you take into consideration the new technologies that are coming on the horizon, the energy equation is looking like it might get flipped on its head. Energy per kilowatt hour around the world is actually in a decline, and it's been so for many, many years as extracting technology of petroleum has become so much easier. So much the technology. Remember the peak oil It's a little bit of a tangent, but remember the whole idea behind peak oil? We were going to run out in like 1975 or 1980 or whatever the threshold was, and we just blasted right past without any more discovery of what they call elephant fields. An elephant field is like a huge pocket of oil in the ground, huge. I don't know the megatons of barrels of it or whatever. I don't know the actual distinction, but these are huge finds, like sonographic projections into the earth. You find later like a lake of oil of a huge size. Okay. Well, since that, I think it was some guy named Hubbard that made this projection about peak oil, because there's no more of these elephant fields to be found. They've all been found around the earth. And so his theory was like, as they deplete and as they kind of pull the oil from that, it takes more energy to get the rest of the oil out, because you have to pump in seawater. When you first kind of put the pipe in, it's gusher, right? It's just bursting out of the ground. But then as you siphon it off, you leave a void space behind, and it takes more and more energy to pull it out.
So how do they know there's not 1,000 miles deep of oil under that lake?
Well, the best estimates, the geophysical properties of the Earth kind of suggest that can't exist. But but who knows? I've never been there, right? But anyway, the point of all this is like we've been on this kind of economy for a long time now, and the technology to extract even small pockets of oil now has gone so vast. Like they're able to hydraulically fracture the Earth miles underground. They put in these hydraulic fracturing things, and
absolutely terrible.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Like it's terrible, but it's amazing. I mean, amazing in the sense that it's even possible.
I mean,
it's up there with cutting off mountaintops, right?
Right. So the construction technology and the extraction technology has grown so vastly superior to what it was when people were making these predictions. We're able to maintain this kind of like seemingly endless amount supply of oil, right? But what's coming in technological terms is fusion power, and fusion power creates a kilowatt price per kilowatt hour that's so low it's practically free. It's not free energy, but it's so reduced cost of energy, and that's going to be one of the most disruptive technologies ever invented by man, because we now have coming on the horizon a nearly infinite source of energy at our disposal. That changes.
So how much will it cost?
Well, that's what people are arguing.
How much will it cost me to lift a mountain 50 feet?
I don't know. I have no idea. So the point of me going on that rant was that there's possibly some technology in the future that would make some of these things possible that never existed before. So this ties back to the servitude or slavery model. Well, if energy was then that cheap, I mean, I could turn these walls into farm if I could, because I could just put grow lights up and run it off the energy, right? And food can be made anywhere all of a sudden, right? So now we're not have this factory farm, we don't have this distribution. Food can be made organically in the home, but that can be automated and done with robotics. So we can have like a dozen living walls in our living spaces, like without any problem. Because the reason that's limited right now is the energy costs are so vast, no one can afford it. Your food bill per month would be like $5,000. Yeah, so nobody.
No, I could mass produce Fresnel lenses if you needed that pretty easily.
Well, you never know. And so someone just mentioned, well, what about the sun? Well, that's what the solar advocates have been arguing for a long time. They said the sun puts enough energy onto the earth, way more than to drive all of these needs. And so we already have the solution. We don't need any of these technologies. It's just a bureaucratic barrier. And so the bureaucratic barriers naturally can produce stiflers of these type of ideas, right? Not because it's not possible, just because of logistics. I think you were saying, Susan, like we could feed the world over, right?
Yeah,
like without problem.
There's plenty of food right now, but we feed a lot of it to animals
and waste a tremendous amount. And it's a logistics thing, right? The food is there. It's just a matter of getting it to its need. So it's possible. We just have this bureaucratic kind of international logistics /
food doesn't go away. The same food has been eaten for billions of years.
Well, and the other thing is that, of course, you've got these giant corporations that are making tons of money, and meat and dairy are the most powerful by far. Though I saw a chart where it's like 70% of all the subsidies go to meat and dairy, and
so there's corruption. There's corruptive forces that actually prevent some of or at least impede some of the progress to these type of values, for sure. So number 5, right? No one shall be subjected to torture, or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. I don't know who would not agree with that. I think that's a hard one to not agree with.
And that should be for all living beings.
Well, they didn't shut down Guantanamo.
One step at a time. One step at a time.
It's still there.
Right?
People aren't telling them to shut it down.
Too bad.
Everyone has the right to number 6. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Ooh, that's interesting. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly whom they're protecting with this one. Do you
Well, to everyone.
They just say you're not a person anymore, so you don't have rights.
What I think,
what I think used to be designated as 2/3 of
another wording for that. You have rights no matter where you go.
Only regarding voting.
So that's a positional thing. The way I see this is yes, I see the positional aspect of this, but everyone has recognition everywhere as a person before the law. The way that reads to me is that no one can be decreed as not being human. Like, and then by then not subject to possessing these rights. That's how I read it. But I do see
they're stopping people from hacking their definitions. That's all.
Cosmo, you had something there?
I was thinking that could this be an international thing? I'm trying to remember a quote from Benjamin Franklin where he was saying, "I wish the world was someday that I could step onto any shore and be a citizen of that country."
Yep, that speaks to the proxy thing. By which proximity you are is irrelevant.
Right.
You maintain your rights.
Actually be
I think it's both. I think it has those two prongs. Like I said, what Jerry said, I think was perfect.
Yeah.
Another simpler explanation. I am a person just like you.
Right. Exactly.
Like everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we cannot be deprived of our humanity, regardless of where we are or how anyone else decides to characterize us. We are human, and that is immutable. That cannot be changed. 7, all are equal before the law and entitled. Perfect word there. Without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination and violence in violation of this declaration and against any incitement or such discrimination. Right? So you're no matter where you are, what you do, who you are, whatever's going on, you cannot be divorced from these protections equally granted in this perfect state of human rights. So we always have to put that caveat out, right? This is, yes, these are ideals, but they're great if you can. I believe that if you can read these and understand them and put yourself, imagine yourself at least looking at things through this lens and having this disposition, this state of mind as you look through the world, you'll start to have a better philosophy towards your brotherhood, towards your fellow man or woman.
Yep. I think that this has been ratified by the Congress of the United States, and so this as a treaty is to be obeyed. So this is actually what we should be living up to, and the fact that we're not only arises from that divisiveness and power that people are trying to get at.
But these are not laws of the United States. They're not being obeyed.
Excuse me. They are the laws of the United States because we ratified that. And once you ratify a treaty, that becomes the law of the United States.
Well, the Patriot Act contradicts the Constitution. So you can't have both, and yet they claim both exist.
Well, that's where we've said this already. We can have both, actually. We do get in these ideas, because if we put forth a list of ideals, there's no doubt that those ideals can be mutually exclusive. We can find examples of adhering to one ideal puts pressure or violates another one. And so that's why you get into this nuance of, a lot of nuanced discussions, a lot of legal precedents, a lot of things, right? Sort this out over time and we improve it. And
so you're saying I can sue someone for not doing these things?
I'm saying you can live by these.
No, they're only laws if I can sue someone for not doing it.
Well, I think that if someone were to put you into slavery, then you'd probably,
Well, for example, arbitrary arrest and detention. They got people waiting in jail for lots of months, sometimes years, before the trial. That's violating it.
You brought up a good point about Guantanamo.
Which, by the way, not within the border, not within the United States.
It's outside the walls of the United States. It's subject to military discretion, not civilian discretion. So that's another sidestep. There's many ways that all these things are sidestepped through jurisdiction, through proxy, And that's what makes these statements so bold, is that they're saying, I'm sorry, that jurisdiction doesn't change anything. So people are still entitled to these rights.
Well, I propose that we pick one of these and sue part of the government for not doing it.
Good luck. Sounds good.
Well, if these are the laws, then you can do that. If you can't do that, then this is just somebody's words.
Well, the Patriot Act has specific rights and exemptions, right? And
if there's an exemption, then it's not really reality.
Well, I think this whole enterprise about human rights was something that we were trying to create. And you're saying, well, if it ain't created now, then it ain't. Then it ain't.
Now, if the United States said we want to do these things later, that is very different from saying this is the law. If you can't be arrested for not doing this, then it's not the law.
Well, I think that we could maybe say that that is a violation of Guantanamo is a violation of human rights, regardless of whether it's a law or not. I mean, the law is not just the projection of ethics. It's also the projection of power. And power is where things get screwed up. Power is where the ethics gets twisted.
Ultimate power corrupts ultimately.
We have the power of the American exceptionalism going down into Cuba, taking parts of their country, saying it's ours, and turning it into an internment camp, concentration camp. That is a violation of human rights, period. I don't care if the United States doesn't say that it is so.
Right there with
you. Screw the United States.
No, but see that passion and that rebellion is actually decreed in the document. Remember at the preamble? It says, like, when this is being violated, we should rebel. So that becomes the actual correct ethical response to it. Even though it seems like, ooh, that's scary, but at the same time, it's the proper, Bill.
Well, power is the ability to perform work, or to do, or to accomplish something. Again, I would say that this document is a set of ethical principles that then have to be implemented in within law, which is a technical sort of thing. Mm-hmm. These statements are highly poetic and can be interpreted in various ways, but the law is very technical and precise, with clear definitions of words and so forth, and precise procedures to be followed, and so on.
Right.
So I still maintain that our laws are the practical applications, and of course, the practical applications of our ethical principles. And of course, the law has to have capability. It has to, and that's referred to as power. So the police have power, courts have power, and so forth.
Sure. Cosmo?
I believe it comes up from the people. Power, laws, all of that comes up from the people. It's we who accept it or don't accept it, and we who build the laws. It's kind of like, if you're not willing to accept these, they'll never get accepted. They'll never be brought into law. It's not going to be by agreement first. It's going to be by we who accept it and live by it. And if enough of us do it, then we can turn it into a law. It comes up from the people.
That's what you think, but then we have our government, who they're the ones that are making the laws, and it's only a select few of people, and they're supposed to be listening to what we want, and yet they're not. They're not working for us anymore.
And so, by that preamble, we have a right to rebel against
We do, but people
or
don't.
change it.
But we don't.
We'll see what's important to people right now in 2019 is like smoking pot, right? That's important to people. So then now the law is changing. Now everyone in the country, within a few years, you'll be able to smoke pot anywhere. Like that's important to people. So
That
that becomes the pressure from.
The only reason why that's getting passed through is because they finally figured out how to make money off of that business. That's the only reason why. It isn't because people really need it for, because they have pain and this and that, and people. It's not about that. It's about money. They figured out how to make money off of it. That's the only reason why.
The only reason why.
It is one of the only reasons why. If you look at our lawmakers, a lot of our, if you look at some of our congressmen and senators, they're not, the ones that aren't in office that were against they were against marijuana and all this stuff, all of a sudden now they're lobbyists for it. Like what is that? Like, that's not that's not for the people.
In
that's
no
for
way
their
is the government benevolent. If they were, they would not have control. That is their job to control. Until we rebel, we cannot become conscious. Until we are conscious, we cannot rebel.
It could be also be a reverberation from prohibition and the nightmare scenario that unfolded there. They see the same maybe mirror circumstances here and said, "Wait, we gotta prohibiting this is probably not the right answer." Lots of people like to smoke up. Not me.
I think we can oversimplify and think about the bad guys that are controlling us and so forth. One of the reasons why the laws are changing is probably two reasons. One is that CBD, cannabidiol, has been found to have very beneficial health effects, and so then it gets complicated because the THC is often connected to it and so forth, and so now the laws have to be rethought. And let's see, the other thing just escaped me. That we are increasingly becoming aware of the imprisoned population. And because of our technology and everything, our ability to look at statistics and see, gosh, the United States having more people in prison than any other country, and what are most of them in prison for? It doesn't. Increasingly, it doesn't make sense. So our government is not completely paid for and controlled by the 1% or the 5% or whatever. That's a major factor, but what we the people think has an effect also, and our politicians have to respond to that.
It's not working right now. I think it's the power to control others that causes this corruption. That there are people with so much money that they can, pay off politicians and say, "Oh, don't vote against guns. People should have guns. Who cares if a few teenagers are going to die?"
There's lots of that. I agree with that, but it's not just that. I think that when there's a groundswell of us saying, "Look, this doesn't make sense" and everything, then that does have an impact.
We can work that up so that we use our voices.
Well, that goes back to the collective consciousness. Unless collectively we all think the same thing, but do you know how to get collectively everyone to think the same thing, especially with technology in this day and age? People don't even really know what they really want.
Exactly. So
if they don't know what they really want, then how can they even
I think I can answer that. The medium of ultimate control, despite intent, just say what is the programming force into the human mind and imagination? It's culture. Culture is the largest predominant shaping force in all of our lives. Our culture dictates more about everything that we do every day than any other feature, right? And so most countries have within the government, they have a ministry or a czar of culture that actually, recognizing this fact, actually works to intentionally shape culture of the society through government, to try to actually, knowing that that's such a prevalent force in the United States. We have what they call a consumer culture. We have a culture of consumption, and that has an unfortunate consequence of being divorced of a lot of, it's a hollow type thing. It leaves a lot of people wanting. You know, the psychology of it is even clear. You buy something, you get a dopamine hit, right? You're excited about it, and then looking at buyer's remorse, you know, then looking at the credit card bill, and next thing you know, it's like, why did I buy that? You know, the whole.
But if you don't buy, the economy doesn't exist.
Yeah, so we're doing our moral duty to buy stuff. You know, like completely absurd. But specifically to these things, and just going back, since it's a time constraint, we'll just go to Article 10. Legitimately, there's not enough time. We're 13 minutes left in our nights, so we'll just do those last three, and we'll keep the flow going of kind of the introducing of each article and then the discussion. It's fine, right? So 8 is the remedy clause. So everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals or acts violating the fundamental right granted him by the Constitution or by law. So to kind of unpack that one a little quickly, right? So effective remedy is kind of important. The word effective before it is, you know, so like someone says, yeah, you know, we took care of it. We addressed it. Well, that might not be effective. Their rights were violated and there was no effective remedy. They were just told that it was solved, right? So effective is an important word there. Competent national tribunals, right? Competent national tribunals.
Yeah, who decides their competence?
Yeah, well, the dysfunction could show the lack of competence. Right? So you can deem something incompetent by its lack of result. Huh?
It's a legal term.
Yes, yeah, it is actually. You're right. Sure, Cosmo.
Yes, when you say competent remedy, an effective remedy, I think that we can talk about the distinction in law of restorative as opposed to retribution.
Yes.
And
amen.
Whereas retribution is not a remedy in any sense.
Exactly. And by nature, effective kind of says that in its definition, because a retributive, retaliatory, right, system. They say, you know, in the eye for the eye, the kingdom of the eye for the eye, everyone's blind now, right? So it's already known through philosophy and through vast studies that just pure punitive systems are not effective remedies to initial. Yeah, agree with you 100%. Yeah, and so that restorative word I think is so crucial, Cosmo. I love that word because that remedy would be a restorative feature, not a punitive one. I totally agree.
But there is still a very strong conviction among us humans that punishment is necessary,
which is cultural.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but it's also naturally occurring in us like it is in other hominids and social species. In other words, the struggle for dominance and who is going to obey whom and so forth. And so if you don't do what I want you to do, you're going to be sorry. We do that in our highly sophisticated ways with our language and everything, but other species do that also.
Yeah.
So we strongly believe in that, and there are not many people that that agree with me that a child should never be punished. I doubt if anybody else in this room believes that a child should never be.
All the kids agree with you.
I do.
All the kids agree with you, Bill.
That relates to Article 5. Article 5 says that no one shall be subjected to torture, cruel, or inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. So that's all.
It's already in here, yeah. Yeah,
so,
I don't
so this
we're trying to fix ourselves.
Yes.
So through human nature and human nature alone, there is no other nature of any other species, to use this term again, speciesization, but human nature and human nature alone is the only one that's been able to produce civilization. Think about that. Think about that. Of which all of us are absorbed daily.
That's a sidetrack.
Yeah, it's a sidetrack, yeah.
That's because of our language.
Yeah, and we recognize our own accomplishments, but I think it's really unfair to judge ants, for example, which seem to have a little civilization. I don't know what they're doing in there.
Sure do.
But yeah, but you know, how can you judge others? We don't really have. We're not really equipped
with them.
to
So
do
how
that.
do we know what their civilization is all about?
I think it's just about respect. You know, live
I like that.
As far as other species go,
Mhm.
Humans, yeah, we should be nicer to each other, and no, we don't need to punish each other because you have to figure out you know, okay, this guy did something horrible, but how did he get to that point? What happened?
Well, and he was only horrible maybe in that moment. Just because someone killed somebody in this moment doesn't make them a killer the rest of their lives. They did it one time.
And I do believe
there is to the person.
Yeah, exactly. I do believe it might be necessary to confine that person if he's dangerous, so that you protect others.
Right.
But I don't believe that you should punish them.
Quarantine, but not punish.
So number 9 is no one shall be subjugated to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile.
Well, we know that ain't.
Wow.
Well, what is quarantine if it's not punishment? Because maybe y'all don't understand quarantine and would want to know what it is.
Yeah.
I ask that because is that what we do to retarded people for whatever reason? And does that remedy the situation? Is in the case of retarded people at some form of punishment on some level?
No.
I mean, is there an appeal been made?
Because quarantine sounds, to my mind, a hell of a lot less toxic or less loaded than incarceration or solitary confinement.
Go beyond the local.
Quarantine sounds much nicer.
Yeah, like if the jail was someplace that you wanted to go, but you're not allowed in.
Yeah. No, I only meant.
It's not just that. Quarantine, we do that if a person has a severely dangerous illness of some sort that is contagious. The purpose of quarantine is to protect humans. But an example would be a person could be in quarantine because they have this tendency to kill people.
Yeah.
And still, we could try to make the life of that person as good as possible in that quarantine setting. But most people will say, no, they must pay for what they did. They must be made to suffer.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in one of our meetups. We talked about the prison industrial complex, and we looked at other models around the world. And there's other models for rehabilitative, right? Quarantine of people, since that's our word, is which it can be shown to be way highly effective comparatively to our system. So there's already models out there for how this can be done in a much better way.
I never hear mention jails for youth. Usually we don't want to use that word for youth. We don't want that. But there's a quarantining done there, trying to take these people out for temporarily. I mean, they're too young. They aren't able to reason or what.
Well, first of all, we don't put any priority on like our educational system. There's very little funding going to schools. Teachers have to buy materials out of their meager salaries.
I'm a teacher, 40 years, and that is overdone.
Well, what I'm saying
in some cases, teachers don't have a big fund, and in some schools they have more big fund.
And they have more students, and they're able to really give the right attention to. So it's just a sad thing that we resort to jailing the kids that we don't know how to control.
Interesting. The jail feature.
We don't do that very often.
It's a set of priorities, and we do not prioritize education.
Chemical incarceration, right? Drug somebody. So we do have a recurring theme here. I think is that the moneyed interest in all of these systems is a corruptive force, right? And so we can look at the corruptive force of some of these moneyed systems being the root of some of the division between barriers in leading to these type of idealisms, these type of objectives, human objectives. So recognizing that, adding that money element to any feature of any system is going to be a corruptive force. So if that's there and we're not able to separate that out right now, we can at least try to work on some countermeasures that delay or defer or otherwise undermine the corrupting forces of that moneyed interest. Right? Cosmo.
I think any kind of class distinctions, it works against this family, the human family. So the whole idea about elites, very poorly framed. I think that the more accurate framing would be dominators. These are people who wish to dominate other people, to control other people. That's what I object to. And I think that that's what these articles are trying to prevent, an abuse of power. But any kind of distinction, class distinction, will bring this stuff down.
Oh, well, we certainly have a little bit of that. We just saw recently how if you have lots of money, you can buy a degree for your kid, and he doesn't even have to participate. Send somebody else to take the test.
Yeah. So number.
Yeah, but they still have to do the work though. You can't just, even if they go and buy the degree, the person still can't be like, okay, I want to be a doctor. Can you buy that for me? And then they start practicing. Like they have to do the work, or it's going to definitely
backfire. I mean, I would think so.
Number 10, everyone is entitled to full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal. Tribunal is used here not in the way that we see it from our American perspective. From the global perspective, this tribunal would be kind of like what happened in the Nuremberg trials and these type of things, right? This impartial tribunal is supposed to be agnostic from any particular state view, is the idea behind the word tribunal here. In the determination of his rights and obligations of any criminal charge against him. Right? So again, everyone is entitled to full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. Yeah, please.
Does that mean that if I feel the United States is discriminating against me, then I can demand that I get an international trial instead of a local trial?
That's the theory. Not necessarily like an individual human right for Ben Rayfield, but in a blanket sense, parties, groups, otherwise people have this right afforded to them, that they have this. The idea here in the United States, sorry, I just want to answer his question fully, is the impartial tribunal system is already baked into the United States. You have this right in the United States. You have right to a jury of peers, all this kind of stuff that are satisfy this idea, at least in theory. I'm not saying it's perfect, but that's how the United States satisfies this Article 10, because we have a right, we have these internal rights built into our Bill of Rights that afford all Americans to a jury of their peers, right? Both in the civil and legal sector. So this, in theory, is obliged by the United States, and so that's how you have it by default. So you don't have to seek an international authority in theory, Ben, because you have this fully.
I'm supposed to trust the oppressor.
I wouldn't say that. Please.
So then you're not going free.
Because of that.
Having to go through a court system and whatever about something that you've done, you're not born free. You are back to that sovereign thing that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. If a sovereign being gets pulled over, has to go to court, they don't have to go through any of this shit. Because they are free. Because they don't follow any laws by the lands and all of that stuff. So that's what.
I think I've seen these YouTube videos about people saying they're sovereign beings or whatever, and the cop tries to give them a ticket, and they're like saying, "You can't do this. I have this paperwork." Huh?
It doesn't work well.
And so, well, I don't know. I don't know what the actual legal jurisdiction. From what I understand, there's people trying to create a legal citizen of the world passport, to where their passport is not distinct to any country, and so then you're afforded full rights. This is a movement. I know that's happening.
Perpetual traveler.
Yeah, that's I think what it's called.
It's been around a while.
There's some other things too about nationless people that renounce their citizenship of particular nations, and they refuse to accept citizenship of any nation to say that they're of this free caliber. So these seem like the little kind of micro acts of rebellion that's being called for, right? When there's a certain set of array of circumstances that are on certain people that are demeaning and privileging one of these rights or these ideologies, one should rebel. To what degree, I think, is debatable, but it's at risk. And I think just to kind of, we're out of time, so just to close, there's a great summary statement that I think Ben was asking for, just kind of like, can we have some simple summaries? And one that I always thought was close to that was some famous person once said, all we have to fear is fear itself. Think about that. That is so simplified and so vastly profound. Right? Yeah, it was FDR.
If an ice age is coming, just be afraid of the fear, not the ice. And then you die.
No, so
You're gonna die anyway.
human beings have a charter. We're on a path that is unprecedented. Okay, this is and it's open ground. Okay, and the thing that stifles human beings and detracts, in every case, you can look at the one poignant thing that kind of diminishes people from this kind of attainment. It's almost always fear. Fear is that basic thing built in to us. Okay, from our human nature, we all have fear and anxiety. Right? You can measure this quite easily. Someone's walking around, you can jump up from behind the thing and scare the crap out of them, and then take their pulse. Okay? Fear is a natural occurring thing that happens to every person. We have, since we have such sophisticated levels of thinking in our cerebral cortex and imagination, circumstantial things can raise this level of fear that are not physical. Psychological things can raise the fear dynamic, extremely, right? Which then impedes performance, impedes possibility, it reduces capability. It's a diminishing effect for humanity. So when we abolish that fear, when we start to live in a no fear paradigm or work towards mitigating fear, we start to see ourselves have more liberty just naturally arise within ourselves. If we can then extend that to our society, if we can create a society that's a reductionist in terms of fear, we can then create a society that's more likely to be able to obtain these type of ideals. So I think that's the key thing. Fear, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Yeah. That's the primary.
And if you live in certain countries, you have to, such as you mentioned earlier. I'm sorry, Bill. You mentioned North Korea earlier.
Yeah.
You better have that fear. You better have that fear. You better smile when the camera is on the crowd. You better have a smile on your face. They're going to look at the film afterwards, and anybody not smiling, well, Kim Jong-un is talking, he's going to chop off your head too. I mean, fear. You better fear if you live in North Korea.
The fears of dying. Like, why is everyone so afraid of dying?
It's inconvenient.
I don't want to die.
But everybody dies.
I don't want to die before my time. Do you?
And I absolutely disagree.
With what?
What we're saying that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that we just need to work on getting that fear is our greatest problem or enemy, so to speak.
It's huge.
Instead, I would say it is anger.
They're usually correlated quite strongly, aren't they?
Yeah, well, yes, but it is the anger that is the problem. Fear is a protective mechanism that says you're in danger. You better get out of this situation, protect yourself, or something like that. And I think Ben said something about the ice. Don't be afraid of being on the thin ice and so forth. The fear is, of course, it has a destructive effect on us. But why do we have the fear? For many reasons, but one of the main reasons that we have interpersonally is anger. Anger is popping up, arising in all different relationships, individual, group. There's relationship breakdown all over the place due to the arising of anger.
That's not preaching.
That's what we need to really understand and work on.
So we are at our close, but briefly, let's let Cosmo and Elizabeth get in just to end on that.
There is
let y'all have the last words.
Between fear and anger, and it's actually manifest on the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere is where disgust turns into anger, and the right hemisphere is where fear gets the flight or fight syndrome. And so because they're kind of like on the opposite sides, but at this kind of like the same kind of cortical place, and because you have a connection between the two, that by connecting, by empowering one, fear, you empower anger too. Now, it doesn't always happen. I mean, you can shut off the anger if you have the fear, but it's kind of like you have to actually shut it off, because if you have the fear, it goes across with the across the hemispheres, and it gets started, it gets ignited in the anger place of the cortex. So in order to disengage that anger, you've got to actually do something to disengage it. But they are connected.
Please.
So the only little bit of a problem I have with your statement, Bill, is that I think anger is sometimes necessary to drive change, and when there is a problem and people are angry enough because of an injustice, they really need to put their fear aside and be courageous enough to make a difference. I mean, I believe in Gandhi, for example's way of demonstrating peacefully and rebelling in a peaceful way, but I think that anger needs to fuel that change.
I understand what you're saying, and I know that that's the most usual response. However, I think indeed anger arising means that there is a situation that needs to be responded to, but anger is going to promote behavior that is probably going to make things worse rather than better, and that what instead needs to be the motivation that will help is the ethical sense, which is what philosophers term for what the motivational state that accompanies an ethical belief. In other words, if I believe I should do something, then that makes me want to do it, and that wanting to do it is the ethical sense. So the ethical principle would say, well, yeah, you may feel like punching him in the nose, but what you should do instead is such and such to make the situation better. So
strategy is better than anger.
Yeah.
So that's our discussion. I was trying to give Elizabeth the last word. So
I think anger has its place. I think you can't live with it forever. You have to come to grips with your anger. And
if you're angry, you got to do something about it.
Do forgiveness and all that. But it is a motivator towards action.
So the formal portion of our meeting is over, right? It's past time, but there's an informal portion that people have a tendency to stay for as long as they wish and discuss whatever they want. So it's open to anybody, of course. So stay as long as you want, talk about anything you want. But we're formally, closed.